Hi, I'm Gwyer, clinical psychologist, and today I'd like to talk about happiness. Imagine a life with no happiness. It would be awful. Happiness is a really great emotion to experience. It's a really good feeling to have. When we think about happiness, though, it's not just one thing. There are lots of separate things that go to making up happiness. So some of the things, let's imagine this is our happiness here. So some of the things might be passion, might feel joy. So to feel passionate about something, to feel joyful about something. Happiness also involves openness to new experiences, to be willing to try to do something new, to be willing to make mistakes. That leads into learning and growth. You know, that really good feeling when you've achieved something, when you've worked really hard and you've achieved it, and you can think, wow, I've put the effort in and I've achieved that. We can have gratitude. A big part of happiness as well also involves acceptance, appreciation. And I've put these three down here: gratitude, appreciation, and acceptance, because sometimes we focus very much on what we don't have as opposed to what we do have. Sometimes we can be grateful for what we do have, or maybe be grateful for the things that aren't happening to us. We can have acceptance for the unpleasant things, the difficult things, the challenging things, and we can show appreciation for the good things, the quality of life, the things that are going well for us. Happiness also requires kindness, compassion, forgiveness. And that's forgiveness towards yourself for being human, for making mistakes, for getting things wrong. If you're going to be open to new experiences and you're going to try and learn, you're going to be making mistakes. That's part of growing, that's part of life. So be forgiving towards yourself for making a mistake, showing yourself kindness, treating yourself like you would treat a good friend, being compassionate towards yourself, but also being forgiving, kind, and compassionate to others, accepting that, you know, just like you, just like me, all of us as human beings make mistakes. Then, emotional literacy, the ability to have good physical health. We can even have spiritual health. And we have our social, occupational life and relationships. So hopefully what you can see there is happiness isn't one single thing. Happiness is a multitude of different things that combine together to create this sense of happiness. I'm very fortunate to be working with my international colleagues in Australia, Hong Kong, and the United States, and be part of the Happiness Centre. And there'll be a link on this video taking you to the Happiness Centre. On that webpage, there is a link to a questionnaire, the Happiness Questionnaire, Happiness Survey. And what it allows you to do is answer a number of questions that cover some of these topics and helps you identify which areas you might want to focus on and which areas kind of need a little bit of work to hopefully increase your sense of happiness. What I want to talk about now is just very briefly this idea that happiness is made up of a whole and lots of separate parts. So what you have is you have a whole and you have parts, and the parts and the whole create something which is happiness. Now the reason I mention this is because all of these things might be equally important, and they probably are equally important, but at different times in our life some of them may be more important than the others. So what we do is, if we can imagine learning and growth, so this part here might be doing really, really well. So that part there kind of comes out, and that might be the part we're focusing on. But just because this is our part of focus, we haven't forgotten the rest of the parts. Other times, let's say our sense of acceptance is really low, so we're finding it really difficult to accept and that might be decreasing our sense of happiness. Because an area, learning and growth, is doing well, what these different areas do is they can help balance them out. So one area of our life might not be doing so well, but another area might be okay, and we can use focus on that area to help bring it up. Because all of these separate parts, although they are separate parts, they are all interconnected, and change in one leads to change in another. So the good news is, if you are struggling with your happiness, you might find, actually, do you know what, working on being a bit kinder to myself, a bit more forgiving to myself is what I need to be doing at the moment. At other times, you might find that increasing my sense of passion and increasing my sense of pleasure, increasing my sense of joy is what I need to do at the moment. So this will help you identify what areas you can focus on, what areas you can improve, and how, as a whole system, your happiness can be increased. Just trying to increase happiness by doing one or two things, maybe going to the movies, maybe buying something, maybe doing something. It's just focusing on one thing. And when you focus on one thing, what happens is you get a fleeting moment of happiness. It kind of builds up and you feel happy, but it then subsides. So really, to be happy and to be continually happy, it's about being aware of all of the separate parts and aware of the individual parts. So in one of the previous videos, I talk about mindfulness, and I talk about expansive mindfulness. So here you would pull back, you could look at the big picture like the landscape painter, and you could just do an overall reflection, mindful awareness of your happiness. But you might then want to use the constrictive mindfulness, the narrow focus, the lens, zoom lens, and focus on one part, and that is the part that you're going to focus on. So you can look at the big picture by pulling back using expansive mindfulness, or you can focus in and use the zoom lens of constrictive mindfulness to focus on a particular area. Now, of course, life doesn't always go well, so there's going to be things which are unpleasant and difficult. So you could use the bare attention of mindfulness to notice those, to let them go. And that brings me on to the next thing I want to talk about. These are kind of some of the pleasant things. So lots of people talk about increasing positives as a way to increase happiness. And that, I think, is a great idea. What I worry about, though, is if that's the only skill you have, if that's the only way that you can increase your happiness, by increasing your positives, life doesn't always go that way. You don't have that much control over life and what life does to you. So I kind of think in one of the previous videos, I talked about an unpleasant emotion or a distressing experience as this spike. And the reason I describe them as spikes is if I imagine a horse chestnut and I'm holding it in my hand, it's really uncomfortable. And I can't hold it, I can't sit with it because it's really uncomfortable. And so what we tend to do as human beings is we either throw things away, so get as far away from it as possible, or we can wrap it in bubble wrap. And there's a number of different ways that people wrap things up in bubble wrap. So drugs, drink. So alcohol and drugs are a way that people can numb that feeling. Also find that self-harm is a way that people numb those feelings. The problem is when we try and numb these feelings, when we try and avoid them, they kind of sneak back up onto us. So no matter how much bubble wrap I put on through drugs, drink, avoidance, self-harm, sometimes even people's eating is a way that they manage their emotions or avoid their emotions, these spikes still come through. It's very different, but if you just try to increase your positive emotions, your positive experiences, as a way to block this out, it won't happen. What you're using is you're using a positive experience, a positive emotion, if there are indeed positive emotions, to mask what is really happening. So that means you're always vulnerable. That means you're going to have to keep putting more and more things into your life, more and more positive things to overcome this. So let's just see what that looks like. So this is often what happens. So this is my person. So there's my person, and here is the unpleasant experience. And you can wrap your bubble wrap around it, and you can block it out. Now, when you try and block it out with positive emotions, what you're trying to do is use these positive emotions here to overshadow the unpleasant feeling. The problem is just blocking it out with positive experiences and positive emotions doesn't stop this from being here. In fact, what will happen is the spikes will get bigger and bigger, and you'll get caught up in this treadmill of constantly trying to put more and more positive things. What you end up being is you end up being in fear of what might happen if this unpleasant experience gets through my avoidance of just using positive experiences and positive emotions. Now, I think positive experiences and positive emotions are really important. In a previous video, I do talk about if there is such a thing as positive and negative emotions. Personally, I don't think there is. I think an emotion is an emotion, and it's the intensity at which you experience that emotion which makes it helpful or unhelpful. I don't believe emotions are positive or negative. I believe they're functional. They tell us something, and what's important is that we feel them in the right way, we act on them, we reflect upon them, we think about if they're warranted, if they're appropriate, and if they're proportionate to what's happening. But when we try and use anything to block out or to avoid how we're feeling, it leaves us vulnerable. It leaves us in fear of this here. And when we're in fear of things, we can't. Let's go back to the previous flip chart. Part of being happy involves having openness to experience. Well, if I'm fearful of life, I'm not going to engage in it because I'm going to be fearful that if I'm open, I'm going to discover new things and it's going to make me unhappy. It's going to frighten me. I won't be able to cope. If I'm fearful, I won't be open to learning and growth because I might get it wrong. Gosh, what would happen if I got it wrong? If I'm fearful of life, it's going to be really hard to forgive myself. It's going to be really hard to be kind to myself. It's going to be hard to be compassionate to others because, gosh, if I make a mistake, I could be in really big trouble. If you're fearful of life, you're not accepting that life is actually quite difficult at times. You know, there's a lot of things out there that could harm us, but we're also very good at coping and managing. So what I worry about is if you use positive emotions and use things as a way of improving your emotional happiness, it can actually lead to a decrease in happiness because you're less open to experiences, you're less open to learning and growing. Being forgiving, kind and compassionate to yourself is harder because there's more worry about making mistakes. You're not as accepting. It's harder for you to show gratitude and appreciation. So I think that when we try and block or improve our happiness by blocking this fear out, by filling it with lots of positive experiences, that's not very helpful. That's not to say it's not part of happiness. And I think what you need is you need two sets of skills. One set of skills is going to be emotional regulation, the ability to manage thoughts, the ability to manage body sensations, and the ability to act wisely. And by that, I mean wise mind. So in one of the previous videos, I talk about the three types of mind. So down here at the bottom, you can have intellectual mind, emotional mind, and the balance is wise mind. and that's where intellect, logic, and facts kind of create a synthesis with emotions, so you get wisdom. Remember this here. The idea is that you march to the beat of your own drum. So what you can do is have this very unpleasant experience, and instead of it getting bigger and bigger and overwhelming you, what you can do is say, right, well, let's break that emotional experience, let's break that challenging experience up into emotions, thoughts, body sensations, and actions. Well, if I do that, automatically you see there's one quarter, there's the second quarter, third quarter, and the fourth quarter. So if I start to break my unpleasant experiences up into the behavior, into my body sensations, into my emotions, into my actions, and into my thoughts, I can make it smaller. When I make it smaller, I'm able to manage it. But remember, as well as marching to the beat of our own drum, we can also look at the spiritual areas of our lives, the biological, the psychological, and the social. So the first skill I think we really do need as human beings is to be able to have the confidence that no matter what life throws at us, no matter what unpleasant experience we have, and no matter how spiky and uncomfortable that feeling is, wrapping it in bubble wrap, trying to block it out and overshadow it with positive things is not going to work in the long term. What we need to be able to do is break that experience down into small, manageable chunks. We can do that by focusing on our body sensations. We can calm and self-soothe our body sensations, focusing on our emotions, identifying them, expressing them, and tolerating them. We can then act wisely, so not acting in an unhelpful way, not acting in a way which is going to kind of add fuel to the fire. And finally, letting go of unhelpful thoughts. We can take that further by ensuring that our spiritual, biological, psychological, and social well-being is high. So that's the first step. Then I think that this part here, number 2, is the ability to create pleasant experiences. And I think it's important to remember that it's a pleasant experience. It may not be a positive experience. Positive means different things to different people. There's an old story about a farmer who one day there's a big thunderstorm and his horse escapes. And the horse disappears, and all the villagers saying, oh, what bad luck, that's a real shame. And the farmer says, well, maybe, who knows. Then a few days later, the horse comes back and it's brought a mare with him. It's a male horse, brought a female horse with him. And all the villagers go, wow, you were so fortunate. Your horse ran off and now your horse has come back and now you've got 2 horses. And he says, yeah, maybe. A few months go by and the 2 horses have a foal, and the neighbours are going, this is so amazing. You lost the horse, it came back. There was another horse, now you've got a pony, a small foal. This is great news. And he said, well, maybe. Then his son learned to ride the pony, the small horse, and everyone was going, this is fantastic, your son's riding a horse, it's great. And he said, well, maybe, who knows. Unfortunately, the son fell off the horse and he broke his hip really, really badly, and he was never able to ride again. And the villagers were saying, oh, that's really unfortunate, you lost the horse came back, you had another horse, you had a foal, your son learned to ride. And he said, well, maybe. Then a few years later, there was a big war and all of the village men had to go off and fight, and all of the able men who could ride a horse went off to fight. The battle was really tragic. Lots of people died, and all of the men from the village were killed in the battle. And the villagers said, oh, you know, you're so fortunate. Your son fell off the horse. He's broken his hip. He can't ride. He didn't go off to battle. You've got him. And the farmer said, maybe, well, you know, maybe. And I guess the idea that's the Taoist farmer. And it's a very old parable. And I guess the idea is we don't really ever know if an experience is positive or negative. Sometimes it takes many years for an experience which we previously thought was negative to actually realize that was such an important experience in our life, and I have grown so much of that experience. So I think instead of looking for things as positive and negative, just think of them at this moment in time, they are pleasant or unpleasant. The good news is that with these skills here and breaking unpleasant experiences down into the 4 parts and looking at the biological, social, we can make them much more manageable. And then we can start looking at the other things we can do to enhance our pleasant experiences. As I said, I'm very fortunate to be working with my international colleagues in the USA, Australia and Hong Kong as part of the Happiness Centre. We offer workshops, we offer work for individuals and organisations, and a few people have asked me about that. So lots of information on our website. You can really see the good work that we can do by helping people improve their sense of well-being, happiness and success. Thank you for listening. I'm Gwyer, clinical psychologist, and I hope today's talk has been useful for you. Thank you very much.